Sarah Martinez stood barely 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed just 115 pounds soaking wet. When she walked into the military recruitment office in El Paso, Texas, the sergeant behind the desk almost laughed out loud. Her small frame and quiet voice didn't exactly scream soldier material to anyone who saw her. "You sure you're in the right place, miss?" the recruitment sergeant asked, barely looking up from his paperwork. The community college is just down the street. Sarah had heard comments like this her entire life. Growing up in a small border town, she was always the smallest kid in her class. Teachers treated her like she might break if they spoke too loudly. Classmates assumed she couldn't handle anything more challenging than organizing school supplies. Even her own family worried about her decision to join the military. But Sarah had something that couldn't be measured by height or weight. She had determination that burned like a desert sun. Her father had served in the army, and her grandfather before him. Military service ran in her blood even if nobody believed she had what it took. The recruitment process was brutal. During the physical fitness test, other recruits towered over her. They whispered among themselves, placing bets on how quickly she would quit. Some made jokes about whether she could even carry a standard-issue rifle without falling over. Sarah ignored every comment and every sideways glance. While others bragged about their strength, she quietly completed every exercise. When they struggled with endurance runs, she kept pace despite her shorter legs. When they complained about the desert heat during training, she pushed forward without a word. Her drill instructors were skeptical at first. They had seen plenty of recruits who looked tough but crumbled under pressure. They had also seen their share of small recruits who couldn't handle the physical demands. Sarah seemed to fit into the second category, at least on paper, but something about her quiet confidence caught their attention. She never made excuses when tasks seemed impossible. She never asked for special treatment because of her size. Instead, she found ways to adapt and overcome every challenge thrown her way. During weapons training, Sarah surprised everyone. Her small hands actually gave her an advantage with precision shooting. Her steady nerves and natural focus made her one of the best marksmen in her unit. While bigger recruits struggled with the weight of heavy weapons, Sarah learned to use leverage and technique to compensate for her size. The other recruits slowly stopped laughing. They began to notice that Sarah never quit, never complained, and never gave up. She might have been small, but she was proving to be tougher than soldiers twice her size. Still, many people remained doubtful. The real test would come when she faced actual combat conditions. Carrying heavy equipment across difficult terrain while under pressure was completely different from controlled training exercises. Everyone wondered if the tiny recruit from Texas could handle what lay ahead. Sarah knew what people were thinking. She could see the doubt in their eyes and hear the whispers when they thought she wasn't listening. But she also knew something they didn't understand yet. Size wasn't everything in combat. Heart, determination, and skill mattered more than physical measurements. As her training progressed, Sarah specialized in long-range precision shooting. She became an expert with various sniper rifles and heavy weapon systems. Her instructors were amazed at how naturally she handled equipment that seemed too big for her small frame. The Barrett M82 became her favorite weapon. This massive anti-material rifle weighed over 30 pounds and was longer than Sarah was tall. Other soldiers struggled with its size and recoil, but Sarah mastered it completely. She could disassemble and reassemble it blindfolded. She could hit targets at distances that seemed impossible. When graduation day arrived, Sarah had proven herself in every area except one. She still hadn't faced real combat conditions where lives depended on her performance. That test would come sooner than anyone expected. In a place where the desert sun was merciless and every step could mean the difference between life and death. 6 months after graduation, Sergeant Sarah Martinez found herself deployed to Afghanistan. The base camp sat in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by endless stretches of desert that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, with temperatures that could kill an unprepared soldier. Her new squad members were typical infantry soldiers. Most of them were big, tough guys who had been in combat before. They knew how to fight, how to survive, and how to depend on each other when things got dangerous. When they first saw Sarah, their reactions were predictable. "They sent us a kid," muttered Corporal Johnson, a massive man from Alabama who could bench press twice Sarah's body weight. "What's she supposed to do if we get into real trouble?" Staff Sergeant Williams, the squad leader, was more diplomatic but equally concerned. "Martinez, I've read your file. Your shooting scores are impressive. But out here, we need soldiers who can carry their weight. Can you handle the physical demands? Sarah had heard these questions countless times. She answered the same way she always did, with quiet confidence and a willingness to prove herself through actions rather than words. I can handle whatever you need me to handle, Sergeant. The first few weeks were challenging in ways that training had never prepared her for. The desert environment was brutal. Daytime temperatures regularly exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The sand got into everything: weapons, food, clothing, and equipment. The nights were surprisingly cold, sometimes dropping below freezing. Sarah's squad was assigned to provide security for supply convoys traveling between bases. It was dangerous work that required soldiers to be alert and ready for combat at all times. Enemy fighters often attacked convoys using improvised explosive devices and sniper fire from hidden positions. During her first convoy mission, Sarah proved she could handle the basic requirements. She stayed alert during long, boring hours of travel. She maintained her equipment properly despite the harsh conditions. She followed orders without question and worked well with the team. But her squad mates still had doubts about her ability to perform under extreme pressure. Carrying a heavy pack through the desert for hours was completely different from the controlled training exercises back home. Real combat situations demanded physical and mental toughness that couldn't be taught in a classroom. Those doubts seemed justified when intelligence reports indicated increased enemy activity in their area. Command decided to establish a forward observation post in the mountains, overlooking a suspected weapons cache. The mission would require a small team to hike 15 miles through rough desert terrain, while carrying all their equipment and weapons. This is going to be tough. Staff Sergeant Williams told his squad during the mission briefing. We'll be carrying everything we need for a week-long observation mission. That includes water, food, ammunition, communication equipment, and specialized weapons for long-range surveillance. He looked directly at Sarah when he mentioned the specialized weapons. The Barrett M82 anti-material rifle was essential for the mission, but it weighed over 30 pounds without ammunition. Combined with the rest of her gear, Sarah would be carrying nearly her own body weight across 15 miles of desert. Martinez, are you sure you can handle the Barrett on this mission? Williams asked. It's not too late to assign it to someone else. Johnson could carry it if needed. Sarah met his gaze steadily. The Barrett is my weapon, Sergeant. I know it better than anyone else in the squad. I can carry it. The other squad members exchanged glances. They respected Sarah's shooting ability, but this mission would push everyone to their physical limits. The desert terrain was rough and unpredictable. Hidden rocks could twist an ankle. Shifting sand made every step uncertain. The blazing sun would drain their strength with each passing hour. Corporal Johnson shook his head doubtfully. 15 miles through that terrain is going to be brutal, and that's just getting there. We still have to be combat ready when we arrive. Private Thompson, the youngest member of the squad, was more direct. No offense, Martinez, but you're half the size of the rest of us. Maybe you should carry the radio instead of the Barrett. Sarah understood their concerns, but she also knew they were underestimating her again. She had trained for exactly this type of mission. Her smaller size actually gave her certain advantages in desert conditions. She needed less water than larger soldiers and generated less body heat during physical exertion. More importantly, she had developed mental toughness that couldn't be measured by physical standards. Pain was temporary. Exhaustion was a state of mind that could be overcome through determination. The mission would be difficult, but she was ready for the challenge. As the squad prepared their equipment for the next morning's departure, Sarah carefully inspected every piece of her gear. Her Barrett M82 was cleaned and properly calibrated. Her ammunition was checked and secured. Her water supplies were calculated down to the ounce. She knew tomorrow would be the ultimate test of everything she had worked for since joining the military. Her squad mates would finally see whether the small soldier from Texas could perform when it really mattered. The squad departed before dawn, when the desert air was still cool and the stars provided enough light for navigation. Sarah adjusted her pack one final time, feeling the weight of the Barrett M82 secured across her back. Combined with her other equipment, ammunition, water, and supplies, she was carrying nearly 110 pounds of gear. Staff Sergeant Williams led the formation, followed by Corporal Johnson and Private Thompson. Sarah took her position at the rear, where she could watch for threats approaching from behind. The formation moved slowly and carefully through the darkness, using night vision equipment to navigate the rocky terrain. For the first 2 hours, the temperature remained manageable. The squad made good progress across relatively flat ground, covering nearly 4 miles before the sun began to rise. Sarah kept pace easily, her breathing steady and controlled despite the heavy load on her back. As the sun climbed higher, the desert began to reveal its true character. What had seemed like flat, open ground in the darkness was actually a series of rolling hills covered with loose rocks and hidden obstacles. Every step required careful attention to avoid twisted ankles or dangerous falls. By mid-morning, the temperature had climbed past 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The metal components of Sarah's rifle began absorbing heat from the sun, making the weapon almost too hot to touch. Sweat soaked through her uniform despite the dry desert air that seemed to suck moisture from everything it touched. Corporal Johnson was the first to show signs of struggle. His massive frame, which seemed so intimidating back at base, was working against him in the desert heat. His body generated more heat than Sarah's smaller frame, and he required more water to stay hydrated. "How you holding up back there, Martinez?" he called over his shoulder during a brief rest stop. "Doing fine, Corporal," Sarah replied, not even breathing hard. She had learned to regulate her pace and breathing, to conserve energy during long missions. While the others gulped water, she took small, measured sips to maintain proper hydration without wasting precious supplies. Private Thompson was struggling more obviously. The youngest member of the squad, he had talked big back at base but was unprepared for the reality of desert conditions. His face was red from heat exhaustion, and he was consuming water faster than the recommended rate. "Maybe we should redistribute some of the equipment," Thompson suggested during their next rest stop. "I could carry the Barrett for a while to give Martinez a break." Staff Sergeant Williams looked at Sarah questioningly. She was clearly handling her load better than Thompson, but military protocol suggested that soldiers should share difficult burdens when possible. "I'm fine, Sergeant," Sarah said firmly. "The Barrett stays with me. I know how to carry it properly and I'm responsible for maintaining it during the mission." Williams nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her response. Switching weapons between squad members in the middle of a mission was rarely a good idea. Each soldier needed to know their equipment intimately, especially when lives might depend on split-second reactions. As they continued the march, the terrain became more challenging. The relatively flat ground gave way to steep hillsides covered with loose rocks that shifted unpredictably underfoot. The squad had to use their hands to climb some sections, making the heavy equipment even more difficult to manage. Sarah's smaller size became an advantage in the rocky terrain. She could find secure footing where larger soldiers struggled. Her lower center of gravity made her more stable on uncertain surfaces. While the others slipped and stumbled, she moved with confidence and precision. The Barrett M82 that had seemed like such a burden during the flat sections became easier to manage in the hills. Sarah had learned to use the weapon's weight to her advantage, letting momentum help carry her up steep slopes. Her extensive training with the rifle had taught her exactly how to balance and position it for maximum efficiency. By noon, when the sun was directly overhead and the temperature exceeded 115 degrees, the squad had covered 10 miles. They were making better time than expected, but the most difficult terrain still lay ahead. The final 5 miles would take them through a series of narrow canyons where the rocks reflected heat like an oven. During their lunch break, hidden in the shade of a large boulder, William studied his map carefully. "The next section is going to be the hardest," he announced. "We'll be climbing steadily for the next 3 miles, then descending into the valley where our observation post is located." He looked at each squad member, assessing their condition. Thompson was clearly exhausted, his face pale despite the heat. Johnson was holding up better but was consuming water at an unsustainable rate. Sarah appeared to be the freshest member of the team, her breathing steady and her movements still controlled and precise. "Martinez, you sure you don't want someone else to carry that rifle?" Williams asked one more time. "It's going to get harder from here." Sarah checked her water supplies and calculated the remaining distance. She had consumed less water than planned and felt stronger than expected. The worst part of the journey was still ahead, but she was confident in her ability to complete the mission. "I've got this, Sergeant," she said with quiet determination. "The Barrett goes where I go." As they prepared to resume the march, Sarah could see doubt in her teammates' eyes. They were all experienced soldiers, But the desert was testing them in ways they hadn't expected. The small woman they had dismissed as a liability was proving to be their strongest performer when conditions were at their worst. The afternoon sun turned the desert into a furnace. The temperature soared past 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and the rocky canyon walls reflected heat like mirrors. Every breath felt like inhaling fire, and the metal equipment became almost too hot to touch safely. Private Thompson was the first to reach his breaking point. 3 miles into the afternoon march, he suddenly stopped and doubled over, dry heaving in the blazing heat. His water supply was dangerously low, and his face had turned an alarming shade of gray. "I can't do this," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "I need to rest. I need more water." Staff Sergeant Williams immediately called a halt and moved the squad into whatever shade they could find among the rocks. He assessed Thompson's condition with growing concern. The young soldier was showing clear signs of heat exhaustion that could quickly progress to life-threatening heat stroke. "Johnson, give Thompson some of your water," Williams ordered. "We need to cool him down before he gets worse." Corporal Johnson reluctantly shared his water, but his own supplies were running lower than planned. The big soldier was consuming twice as much fluid as Sarah, and the extreme heat was taking a severe toll on his massive frame. Sarah watched the situation develop with growing alarm. If Thompson couldn't continue, the mission would be compromised. They were still 5 miles from their objective, with the most difficult terrain yet to cross. Turning back now would mean abandoning critical intelligence gathering that could save lives at other bases. "What if we redistribute the equipment?" Thompson suggested weakly. "I could leave some gear here and pick it up on the way back." Williams shook his head. "Everything we're carrying is essential for the mission. We can't leave equipment behind in hostile territory." The squad leader studied his map again, calculating distances and water consumption rates. The math was not encouraging. At their current pace and consumption rate, they might not have enough water to reach the objective and return safely to base. "Maybe Martinez should carry less weight," Johnson suggested, though he was clearly struggling himself. "We could distribute her gear among the rest of us." Sarah listened to the discussion with growing frustration. Her teammates were assuming she was the weak link in the squad, when in reality she was the only one maintaining peak performance. She was consuming less water, moving more efficiently, and showing no signs of fatigue. "I'm carrying exactly what I need to carry," Sarah said firmly. "My gear stays with me. The Barrett is my responsibility." Williams looked at her skeptically. "Martinez, nobody's questioning your dedication, but we need to be practical. If we light load you, we might be able to move faster and conserve water." Sarah stood up and adjusted her pack, the Barrett M82 secure across her back. "Sergeant, I'm the strongest member of this squad right now. Look around you. I'm not the one who needs help." It was a bold statement, but the evidence was undeniable. While Thompson struggled with heat exhaustion and Johnson battled fatigue, Sarah appeared ready to march another 15 miles if necessary. Her smaller size and superior conditioning were proving to be major advantages in extreme conditions. "She's right," Thompson admitted grudgingly. "Martinez is handling this better than any of us." The admission hung in the air like the desert heat. For months, the squad had assumed that Sarah's small size made her a liability. Now, when conditions were at their worst, she was proving to be their strongest asset. Williams made a difficult command decision. "Thompson, you're going to have to dig deep and find a way to continue. We can't turn back now, and we can't afford to leave anyone behind." The squad resumed their march, but the pace was noticeably slower. Thompson struggled with every step, requiring frequent rest breaks. Johnson's breathing became labored as the heat sapped his strength. Williams maintained steady leadership, but was clearly concerned about his team's condition. Sarah found herself taking point more often, scouting ahead to find the easiest routes through the rocky terrain. Her expertise with the Barrett allowed her to use the weapon's powerful scope to identify the best paths forward, saving the squad valuable time and energy. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the terrain became increasingly treacherous. Loose rocks shifted underfoot, threatening to send soldiers tumbling down steep slopes. The narrow canyon walls blocked any breeze, creating an oven-like environment that seemed designed to break human endurance. During one particularly difficult ascent, Johnson stumbled and nearly fell. The massive soldier caught himself just in time, but the near accident revealed how dangerous their situation had become. One mistake could result in serious injury or death in this remote location. "This is insane," Johnson muttered, wiping sweat from his eyes. "Nobody should be operating in these conditions." Sarah continued climbing steadily, her movements controlled and precise despite the extreme heat. The Barrett M82 that had seemed like such a burden at the beginning of the mission was now just another piece of equipment she carried efficiently. As the afternoon wore on, it became clear that Sarah was not just keeping up with her teammates, she was outperforming them in every measurable way. Her water consumption remained controlled, her pace stayed steady, and her attitude remained positive when others began to despair. The squad that had mocked her size 6 months ago was learning a valuable lesson about judging people by their appearance. In the crucible of the desert, strength came in many forms, and the smallest soldier was proving to be the toughest of them all. With 2 miles remaining to their objective, the squad faced their greatest challenge yet. The temperature had reached 125 degrees Fahrenheit, and the rocky terrain had given way to deep sand that shifted with every step. Walking through the loose sand was like trying to run on a treadmill, exhausting effort with minimal forward progress. Private Thompson finally collapsed completely. His legs simply gave out, and he fell face first into the burning sand. When Johnson and Williams pulled him upright, his eyes were unfocused and his skin was dangerously hot to the touch. "He's got heat stroke," Williams said grimly. "We need to get him cooled down immediately or he could die out here." The squad found minimal shade behind a cluster of rocks and began emergency treatment. They poured precious water over Thompson's head and removed his outer gear to help his body temperature drop. The young soldier was barely conscious and mumbling incoherently. "We need to call for medical evacuation," Johnson said, reaching for the radio. "Thompson can't continue and we can't leave him here." Williams faced an impossible decision. Calling for evacuation would compromise the mission and potentially expose rescue helicopters to enemy fire. But leaving a soldier behind was unthinkable, and Thompson needed immediate medical attention. Sarah studied the situation with tactical clarity. "How much water do we have left?" she asked. Williams calculated quickly. "Maybe 3 liters total, and we still need to get back to base after completing the mission." "That's not enough for all 4 of us to complete the mission and return safely," Sarah observed. "But it might be enough for one person to reach the objective, gather the intelligence, and return to this position." The implication was clear, though nobody wanted to say it out loud. Someone would need to complete the mission alone, while the others remained with Thompson. That person would have to carry minimal water while humping the Barrett M82 the final 2 miles through the worst terrain they had encountered. "Absolutely not," Williams said immediately. "We don't send soldiers on solo missions in hostile territory. It's too dangerous." Sarah checked her equipment and calculated distances. "Sergeant, I can make it to the observation post, set up the Barrett, collect the intelligence data, and return here in 4 hours. That gives you time to stabilize Thompson and prepare for evacuation." Johnson shook his head emphatically. "Martinez, you're tough, but that's suicide. 2 miles through this terrain alone carrying that rifle? What if you run into enemy fighters?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Then I deal with enemy fighters. That's what the Barrett is for." Williams studied his smallest squad member with new respect. 6 months ago, he would have laughed at the suggestion that Sarah could complete a solo mission in extreme conditions. Now, after watching her outperform everyone else for the past 12 hours, he was beginning to think she might be the only one capable of success. "The intelligence is critical," Sarah continued. "Command needs that information about the weapons cache to plan future operations. If we abort the mission now, other soldiers will die because we didn't gather the data they need." It was a compelling argument, and Williams knew she was right. The intelligence they were supposed to gather could prevent enemy attacks on supply convoys. Failure to complete the mission would put other American lives at risk. But sending one soldier alone into hostile territory violated every principle of tactical operations. Solo missions were reserved for highly specialized reconnaissance units, not regular infantry soldiers carrying heavy weapons. "I can't authorize a solo mission," Williams said finally. "The risk is too great." Sarah stood up and adjusted her pack, securing the Barrett M82 across her back. "Then don't authorize it, Sergeant. I'm volunteering to scout ahead and establish a temporary observation post. You can follow when Thompson is stable enough to travel." It was a clever distinction that gave Williams plausible deniability while allowing Sarah to complete the mission. Officially, she would be conducting an extended reconnaissance patrol, Unofficially, everyone understood she was attempting to save the mission single-handedly. Thompson stirred slightly and mumbled, "Go get them, Martinez. Show those targets what Texas tough looks like." The vote of confidence from the soldier who had doubted her most carried special weight. Johnson nodded reluctantly, recognizing that Sarah represented their best chance of mission success. "If you're really going to do this, take the radio," Williams said. "Check in every 30 minutes and abort immediately if you encounter enemy contact." Sarah secured the radio and verified her water supply. She had just over 1 liter remaining, barely enough for the round trip under normal conditions, but she would have to make it work. "I'll be back in 4 hours with the intelligence data," she promised. "Keep Thompson alive until I return." As Sarah set off alone into the blazing desert, her 3 teammates watched with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. The small woman they had initially dismissed as inadequate was now their only hope of completing the mission successfully. The Barrett M82, that had seemed too heavy for her small frame, was about to prove its worth in ways nobody had anticipated. Sarah was carrying more than just a weapon. She was carrying the hopes of her squad and the success of their mission into the heart of enemy territory. Sarah moved through the desert with methodical precision, every step calculated to conserve energy and maintain steady progress. The Barrett M82 across her back had become as natural as breathing after 15 miles of constant carry. Her body had adapted to the weapon's weight, using its mass to help maintain momentum across the shifting sand. The final 2 miles proved to be the most challenging terrain of the entire mission. The loose sand gave way to a series of steep rocky outcroppings that required careful climbing. Sarah used the Barrett's scope to scout each section before committing to a route, finding paths that would have been impossible to identify from ground level. Halfway to the objective, she encountered her first sign of enemy activity. Fresh footprints in the sand indicated that hostile fighters had passed through the area recently. Sarah immediately went into stealth mode, moving more slowly and using available cover to mask her approach. The radio crackled with Williams's voice. "Martinez, report your status." 1 mile from objective," Sarah whispered into the microphone. "Signs of recent enemy activity but no visual contact. Proceeding with caution." She continued forward, using skills learned in sniper training to move silently across terrain that seemed impossible to cross quietly. The loose rocks that had challenged her squadmates became stepping stones that she navigated with cat-like precision. As Sarah crested the final ridge before the observation post, she spotted the target area through the Barrett's powerful scope. The suspected weapons cache was exactly where intelligence reports had indicated, a series of caves and structures hidden in a narrow valley below. But there was a problem. 3 enemy fighters were positioned near the cache, armed with assault rifles and apparently conducting security patrols. Sarah would need to establish her observation post without being detected, gather the required intelligence data, and extract safely while avoiding contact with hostile forces. She found an ideal position among the rocks that provided clear sight lines to the target area while offering concealment from enemy observation. Sarah carefully set up the Barrett M82, using the weapon's bipod to create a stable shooting platform that could engage targets at extreme range if necessary. Through the rifle's scope, Sarah began documenting everything she observed. The cache contained significantly more weapons than intelligence reports had suggested. She counted dozens of rocket-propelled grenades, heavy machine guns, and what appeared to be improvised explosive device components. "Command, this is Martinez," she radioed back to base. "I have eyes on the target. Weapons cache is larger than expected, counting multiple RPGs, heavy weapons, and IED materials. Recommend immediate airstrike." The intelligence she was gathering could save dozens of American lives by eliminating weapons that would otherwise be used against friendly forces. But as Sarah continued her observation, the situation became more complicated. A vehicle approached the cache, and Sarah watched through her scope as additional enemy fighters emerged. What had been a 3-person security detail suddenly became a gathering of nearly 12 armed combatants. They were clearly preparing to move the weapons to a new location. Sarah faced a critical decision. She could complete her intelligence gathering mission and withdraw safely, or she could take action to prevent the weapons from being relocated where they might be harder to find and destroy. The Barrett M82 in her hands was more than capable of engaging targets at the range, separating her from the enemy position. One well-placed shot could disable their vehicle and trap the weapons in place for the airstrike. But engaging the enemy would compromise her position and make extraction extremely dangerous. "Martinez, what's your status?" Williams's voice came through the radio. "Multiple enemy fighters at the cache. They appear to be preparing to relocate the weapons. I can disable their vehicle, but it will expose my position." There was a long pause before Williams responded. "Negative, Martinez. Gather your intelligence and extract immediately. Do not engage unless fired upon." Sarah understood the order, but she also understood the tactical situation. If the weapons were moved, they might never be found again. Those same weapons could kill American soldiers in future attacks. The opportunity to neutralize the threat might not come again. She made a command decision that would define her military career. Sarah adjusted the Barrett's scope for the precise range to the enemy vehicle and controlled her breathing as she had been trained. The shot would need to be perfect. One chance to disable the vehicle without causing casualties that might escalate the situation. The Barrett M82 fired with its characteristic thunderous report that echoed across the desert valley. Sarah's shot struck the vehicle's engine block, immediately disabling it in a cloud of steam and smoke. The enemy fighters scrambled for cover, unsure where the shot had come from. "Martinez, report." Williams' voice was urgent on the radio. "Vehicle disabled. Cache secured in place. Beginning extraction now." Sarah quickly packed her equipment and began moving toward her extraction route. Behind her, the enemy fighters were searching desperately for the sniper position, but she was already disappearing into the rocky terrain that provided perfect concealment. The 2-mile return journey became a tactical withdrawal under potential enemy pursuit. Sarah used every skill she had learned to move quickly while remaining undetected. The Barrett M82 that had been her burden was now her lifeline, the weapon that had completed the mission and might be needed again for self-defense. 4 hours after leaving her squad, Sarah appeared over the ridge where Williams, Johnson, and Thompson were waiting. Thompson was conscious and stable, ready for evacuation. The mission had been completed successfully, and the intelligence she gathered would save lives. As the medical evacuation helicopter approached their position, Williams looked at Sarah with newfound respect. "Martinez, that was some of the finest soldiering I've ever witnessed. You saved this mission." Sarah simply nodded and checked her equipment one final time. The Barrett M82 had carried her through 15 miles of brutal desert terrain and enabled her to complete an impossible mission. More importantly, she had finally proven to herself and her teammates that size meant nothing compared to determination, skill, and heart. The squad that had mocked her appearance 6 months earlier now understood what real strength looked like. It came in small packages sometimes, but it could move mountains when it needed to.